They say everything's bigger in Texas. The hats, the trucks, the egos, and apparently the sheer audacity of homeowners associations. I learned that lesson the hard way when the brand new luxury HOA next door decided my ancestral ranch land was just unclaimed territory for their infrastructure needs. They thought they could run a high-voltage power line straight across my prime grazing pasture to power their McMansions without so much as a howdy, let alone permission or payment. But if there's one thing bigger than Texas egos, it's Texas property rights. And they severely underestimated just how far a wronged rancher would go during the peak of a scorching summer heatwave to reclaim what's his and teach a lesson about whose switch controls the lights. Drop a comment if you've ever had a nightmare neighbor story, because this one takes the cake, serves it up cold, and leaves the bullies sweating it out in the dark. It all started innocuously enough, or so it seemed, back in the early spring. The development, Sterling Creek Estates, had been slowly expanding over the past few years on the parcel adjacent to the north end of my family's ranch. We hadn't had much trouble initially. They kept to their side of the fence, mostly. A bit noisy during construction, sure, but manageable. This latest phase, Phase 3, was supposed to be their most luxurious yet bigger houses, fancy amenities, and a target market of folks who probably thought ranching was something you watched on TV, not something that required thousands of acres of uninterrupted land passed down through generations. I'd inherited this land from my father, who inherited it from his, and its legacy was woven into my very being. Every fence post, every stock tank, every sway of the tall grass told a story I was duty-bound to protect. The first inkling of real trouble wasn't a letter or a phone call, it was the sound of heavy machinery where it shouldn't be. I was out checking fence lines on my ATV one morning, when I heard the distinct growl of a backhoe and trenching equipment coming from the far northeast pasture, the one bordering Sterling Creek's newest section. This wasn't near the property line. This was deep into my land, at least a quarter-mile inside my fence. Curiosity turned to cold dread as I crested a small rise and saw it, a team of contractors carving a wide scar across my pasture, laying thick black conduit. Towering over them were newly erected, stark metal poles, the unmistakable signature of a power transmission line. My heart pounded against my ribs, a mixture of disbelief and white-hot anger rising in my throat. I gunned the ATV engine and sped towards them, dust billowing behind me. A foreman in a hard hat looked up, startled, as I skidded to a halt just yards away. "What in the Sam Hill do you think you're doing on my property?" I demanded, my voice tight. The foreman, a guy named Chet, according to his vest, wiped sweat from his brow with a grimy handkerchief. He seemed more inconvenienced than concerned. "Just following the work order, mister," he drawled, gesturing vaguely towards the HOA development. "Running the power for the new section over yonder. Got the easement specs right here." He patted a binder tucked under his arm. "Easement? There is no easement. This is private property," I shot back. "You are trespassing, and you are damaging my land. Shut this down right now." Chet sighed dramatically. "Look, pal, the paperwork comes from the Sterling Creek HOA folks, and the developer says they got the right-of-way cleared. Any problem? You take it up with them. We just dig where they tell us." He clearly didn't care whose land it was, only about finishing the job. I demanded to see this supposed easement paperwork. He reluctantly pulled out a map. It showed the power line route clearly marked, running straight through my pasture. There was a space for a landowner's signature, but it was conspicuously blank. There was no recorded easement number, no county seal, nothing official. It looked like something drawn up by the developer themselves, a hopeful fiction at best. "This isn't worth the paper it's printed on," I said, trying to keep my voice level despite the fury churning inside. "There's no signature, no official filing. You're operating illegally. I want you and your equipment off my land immediately." Chet shrugged, already turning back to his crew. "Can't do that. We got a schedule. Talk to Brenda Carlisle over at the HOA office. She's the one pulling the strings." Brenda Carlisle. The name resonated with a vague sense of dread. I'd heard whispers from other neighbors about the new HOA president for Phase 3, someone notoriously difficult, a transplant with zero understanding of rural life or respect for established boundaries. Leaving the contractors with a final, unambiguous warning that they were trespassing and would be held liable for damages, I raced back towards the ranch house, my mind whirling. How could they be so brazen? Did they think I wouldn't notice? Or worse, that I wouldn't care or wouldn't have the backbone to fight back? Reaching the house, I immediately looked up the Sterling Creek HOA contact information. Getting through to Brenda Carlisle proved to be the first layer of the bureaucratic nightmare they'd constructed. Gatekeepers, voicemail, black holes, promises of callbacks that never materialized. It took 2 days of persistent, near-constant calling before I finally got her on the phone. Her voice was clipped, dismissive, dripping with condescension from the moment she realized who I was. "Mr. Davies," she began, using my last name like it was something unpleasant she'd stepped in. "I understand you spoke with our contractors. There seems to be some confusion on your part about the designated utility corridor," I explained, patiently at first. That there was no confusion and no designated corridor on my private property. I told her I had owned the land for decades, the deeds were clear, and no easement had ever been granted. She responded with utter dismissiveness. "Well, our developer, Sterling Homes, assured the board that all necessary permissions were secured. Perhaps you forgot signing something. Or maybe the previous owner did." The insinuation that my family or I were either incompetent or forgetful stoked my anger further. There was no previous owner in recent memory who could have signed such a thing, I stated firmly. "And I can assure you, I signed nothing. Your contractors are trespassing. They are damaging my grazing land. They need to cease work and vacate immediately." Brenda Carlisle laughed, a short, unpleasant sound. "Mr. Davies, that's simply not possible. Phase 3 needs power. Our residents, many of whom are very influential people, are expecting to move in soon. This power line is essential infrastructure. We have project deadlines mandated by our investors. Perhaps you simply don't understand the complexities of modern development." Her arrogance was staggering. It was clear she saw my ranch, not as a home or a legacy, but as an inconvenient patch of dirt obstructing her subdivision's progress. "The only complexity I see," I countered, my voice dangerously low, "is that your entire operation is currently based on illegal activity on my land. Remove the line, or I will be forced to pursue legal action against the HOA, the developer, and the contractors personally." There was a pause, then she said coolly, "You do whatever you feel you must, Mr. Davies. Sterling Homes' legal team handles these minor disputes. We have the resources to see this through. Now, I have important matters to attend to." And she hung up. Just like that. Dismissed. Ignored. Treated like a bumpkin standing in the way of progress. The line clicked dead, leaving only the buzzing silence in the room and the simmering rage in my chest. They hadn't just trespassed. They'd thrown down the gauntlet. They believed their money, their influential people, and their fancy lawyers made them untouchable. They thought they could steamroll a simple rancher. They were about to find out just how complex things could get when you poke a sleeping bear who knows his land and his rights better than they know their own floor plans. The battle lines were drawn, not just on my pasture, but right through the heart of common decency and respect for property rights. The Texas sun was getting warmer, but the storm brewing inside me was just getting started. They wanted a fight. They were damn sure going to get one. The initial shock and anger began to coalesce into cold, hard determination. Brenda Carlisle and Sterling Homes had made their position clear. They considered my property rights irrelevant compared to their schedule and their buyers' expectations. Fine. If they wanted to play hardball, I'd show them I owned the whole damn stadium, not just the field they were illegally digging up. My first call was to my lawyer, Ben Carter, a sharp guy based out of Austin who specialized in Texas property law. Ben listened patiently as I recounted the story, the discovery, the foreman's flimsy easement map, Brenda's utter dismissal, classic developer arrogance. Ben sighed when I finished. They budget for legal battles like this, figuring landowners will eventually give up or settle cheap. They bet on intimidation and deep pockets. He confirmed my initial assessment. Without a signed, recorded easement, they were absolutely trespassing. The first step, Ben advised, is a formal cease and desist letter. We'll send it certified mail to the HOA president, the developer's corporate office, and the contracting company foreman, Chet. We demand immediate cessation of all work on your property, removal of all equipment and materials, and restoration of the land to its original condition. We'll give them 10 business days to comply before initiating a lawsuit for trespass, damages, and injunctive relief. While Ben drafted the legalese, I started my own reconnaissance. I spent hours driving the perimeter of my ranch and the adjacent Sterling Creek development, documenting everything. I took hundreds of photos, the power poles stark against the blue sky, the deep trenches scarring the pasture, the spools of cable, the heavy equipment bearing the contractor's logo, parked brazenly on my land overnight. I recorded videos, narrating the date, time, and location, clearly showing the property lines and the extent of the incursion. I even used my drone to get aerial shots, providing an undeniable perspective of how far onto my property they'd encroached. It wasn't a minor overlap. It was a deliberate, straight-line cut right through the middle of a crucial grazing area. This wasn't just about the land itself. It was impacting my operations, forcing me to move cattle and disrupting my rotation schedules. The cease and desist letters went out. The 10 business days ticked by with agonizing slowness. The contractors, however, did not slow down. If anything, they seemed to accelerate their work, pushing deeper into my property, setting more poles, digging more trenches. It was a calculated act of defiance. Clearly, Brenda and Sterling Homes had received the letters and simply thrown them in the trash, confident their lawyers could stall or squash any legal challenge. They were calling my bluff. When the deadline passed with no response other than the continued rumble of machinery, Ben filed the lawsuit. We sued the HOA, Sterling Homes Development Corp., and Chet's contracting company. We sought an immediate temporary restraining order, TRO, to halt construction, followed by a permanent injunction, substantial monetary damages for the trespass and destruction of property, punitive damages for their willful disregard of my rights, and full costs for restoring my land. The initial court date for the TRO hearing was set for 3 weeks out, an eternity when every day meant more damage to my property. The judge, citing the essential nature of providing power to a new development and the developer's vague assurances that proper easements were pending, denied the immediate TRO, but scheduled a preliminary injunction hearing for a month later. It was a setback. Sterling Homes lawyers were good, painting me as an unreasonable holdout blocking progress for dozens of families. They produced internal documents, likely backdated or created for the occasion, suggesting ongoing negotiations for an easement, implying this was just a simple misunderstanding blown out of proportion. Brenda Carlisle even submitted an affidavit claiming she had had cordial discussions with me, a blatant lie that made my blood boil. They were burying us in paperwork, motions, and delays, just as Ben predicted. Their strategy was clear: keep building, finish the line, power up the houses, and present the court with a fait accompli. Your Honor, the power is already on. Forcing removal would displace families and cause undue hardship. It was infuriatingly effective. The construction continued, relentlessly. Poles went up, lines were strung. The physical scar on my land deepened, a constant, ugly reminder of their arrogance. Friends and neighbors offered support, some even suggesting more direct methods involving fence cutters or a well-placed round from a hunting rifle, but I knew I had to play the long game. Escalating illegally would only hurt my case. My fight had to be legal, strategic, and ultimately more damaging to them than a severed cable they could quickly repair. Frustrated by the slow grind of the legal system, I shifted my focus. If I couldn't stop them from building the line on my property immediately, perhaps I could find another way to control the situation. Where did this power come from? Sterling Creek Estates wasn't just tapping into the main grid, apparently. The scale and location suggested a dedicated feed. I started looking more closely at the development plans filed with the county, permits, and any public utility commission records I could access. Late one evening, hunched over my computer, scrolling through endless PDF documents related to Sterling Homes utility applications, I found something interesting. Due to the location and the phased build-out, connecting Phase 3 directly to the main electrical grid operated by the regional utility giant was proving prohibitively expensive and logistically complex, requiring extensive upgrades miles away. To expedite getting power to their demanding Phase 3 buyers, Sterling Homes had apparently pursued an alternative, supposedly temporary solution. They had contracted with a much smaller, almost boutique energy provider that specialized in setting up dedicated power generation for new developments, particularly in areas with challenging grid access. Digging deeper into this smaller provider, I discovered they had installed a dedicated substation and small solar farm array specifically for Sterling Creek Phase 3, located on a small, commercially zoned parcel just outside the main HOA grounds, but adjacent to it, and, crucially, not on my ranch land. This substation was the sole source feeding the new power line cutting across my property. And then I found the nugget, the detail that made my pulse quicken. The infrastructure, the solar array, battery storage, and the substation itself wasn't owned by the small energy provider, nor by the regional utility. It had been built and was owned by a separate limited liability company, Sterling Sun Solutions LLC. A quick search on the Texas Secretary of State website revealed the officers of Sterling Sun Solutions LLC were the same executives listed for Sterling Homes Development Corp. It was a shell company, set up probably for liability reasons or specific financing arrangements related to the green energy aspect they were likely marketing. This separate ownership, this isolation from the main grid, this reliance on a single, specific point of source. An idea began to form, audacious and complex, but potentially devastatingly effective. Could Sterling Sun Solutions LLC, the owner of the power source itself, be vulnerable? Was it possible that this asset, likely considered just a functional piece of infrastructure by the developer, could somehow be acquired? The legal battle over the easement was important for restoring my land, but severing their power at the source? That was a different kind of leverage altogether. That was striking at the heart of their entire Phase 3 operation. The Texas summer was heating up, temperatures regularly climbing into the high 90s. The thought of those multi-million-dollar homes, filled with influential people, sitting powerless with no air conditioning under the relentless Texas sun, it brought the first genuine smile to my face in weeks. The game wasn't over. It was just beginning. My focus shifted from defense to offense. I wasn't just going to fight their trespassing line. I was going to target their power supply. It was time to see just how much Sterling Sun Solutions LLC and its parent company truly valued that crucial piece of their puzzle. The discovery of Sterling Sun Solutions LLC and its ownership of the dedicated power source for Phase 3 felt like finding a hidden key. Now, I had to figure out if that key could actually unlock the door I wanted, the door leading to cutting off their power. This wasn't about simple vengeance anymore. Though the thought was undeniably appealing, it was about leverage. If I could control their power, I could dictate the terms of removing that damn line from my property far more effectively than just relying on the slow-moving courts. I dove headfirst into researching Sterling Sun Solutions LLC and its assets. This required more than just public records. I needed specifics about its financial health, its operational agreements, and, most importantly, whether its primary asset, the solar farm and substation servicing Phase 3, was encumbered or potentially available. Ben Carter, my lawyer, was initially skeptical. Acquiring a utility asset, even a small one like this, is complex, David, he warned. There are regulatory hurdles, operational contracts, liability issues, and why would Sterling Homes sell the power source for their flagship new development? His caution was valid, but my rancher's gut told me there was something here. Developers, especially large ones juggling multiple projects, often treated these dedicated infrastructure components as necessary evils, line items on a budget sheet managed by subsidiary companies. They weren't emotionally attached to a solar panel the way I was to my land. I decided to enlist some specialized help. I contacted a forensic accountant I knew, a woman named Maria who usually worked corporate fraud cases but had an uncanny ability to dissect shell corporations and find financial vulnerabilities. I also reached out to an old college friend, Tom, who now worked in commercial real estate brokering, specifically dealing with unique commercial properties and assets. I gave Maria the LLC details and asked her to dig into Sterling Sun Solutions' financials, any loans, liens, operating agreements, tax records, anything that might indicate financial stress or suggest the asset wasn't as tightly integrated into Sterling Homes' core holdings as Brenda Carlisle's bluster implied. I tasked Tom with discreetly investigating the small parcel of land the substation and solar array sat on. Who owned the land itself? Was it leased or owned by the LLC? Were there any indications it, or the assets on it, might be quietly shopped around? The wait for information was nerve-wracking. Meanwhile, the Powerline construction across my pasture was nearing completion. The cables were strung, glistening black snakes suspended between the ugly metal poles, a daily insult to my view and my rights. The contractors packed up most of their heavy equipment, leaving only the finished line and the deep ruts and damaged ground behind. Sterling Homes lawyers continued their stalling tactics in court, filing motion after motion to delay the preliminary injunction hearing. Every legal bill reminded me of the financial drain this fight was causing, contrasted against the developer's seemingly bottomless pockets. Then, Maria called. "Interesting setup with Sterling Sun Solutions," she began, her voice betraying a hint of professional excitement. "It looks like it was financed separately from the main development, possibly through a green energy fund or a specific equipment lease-back arrangement. There's significant debt attached specifically to the solar array and substation assets serviced by the LLC, not guaranteed by the parent company Sterling Homes directly." She explained that the revenue stream for Sterling Sun Solutions LLC came solely from a power purchase agreement, PPA, with the Sterling Creek Phase 3, HOA. The HOA paid the LLC for the electricity consumed. However, Maria had found indicators of financial strain. Construction costs for the solar farm had apparently run over budget, and the PPA rate, likely negotiated aggressively by Sterling Homes, acting as both seller via the LLC and buyer via the HOA, might not be sufficient to comfortably service the debt and operational costs, especially if Phase 3 occupancy wasn't ramping up as quickly as projected. Basically, Maria concluded, Sterling Sun Solutions might be barely breaking even or even slightly underwater. It's a functional asset, but potentially not a profitable one for them right now. It's plausible they might entertain an offer to offload the debt and the operational headache if it wasn't essential to their immediate strategic goals. Almost simultaneously, Tom called with his findings. The land itself, a 5-acre parcel zoned light industrial, commercial, was indeed owned outright by Sterling Sun Solutions LLC. He hadn't seen any public listing for the property or the assets, but he had picked up faint whispers through his network. It sounds like Sterling Homes might be looking to consolidate some of their non-core assets, Tom said carefully. They have another, much larger development starting across the state, and there's talk they need to free up capital. Something like a small, single-purpose solar facility managed by a subsidiary LLC? That's exactly the kind of thing a CFO might tag as disposable if the price is right, especially if they believe they can eventually secure a cheaper grid connection for Phase 3 later on. This was it, the vulnerability. Sterling Homes, likely focused on their next big project and possibly feeling a cash squeeze, might see Sterling Sun Solutions LLC not as indispensable, but as a C-suite headache representing underperforming capital tied up in debt. They might not have made the connection between selling this small LLC and jeopardizing the immediate power supply to Phase 3, especially if the inquiry came through discreet channels, seemingly unrelated to my ongoing lawsuit. The audacity of the plan crystallized. I would make an offer to buy Sterling Sun Solutions LLC outright. Lock, stock, barrel, solar panels, substation, debt, and most crucially, the PPA contract with the Sterling Creek Phase 3 HOA. Of course, I couldn't make the offer directly. They'd see my name and immediately connect it to the lawsuit. The price would skyrocket, or they'd refuse outright. This needed finesse. Tom suggested setting up a new, anonymous LLC, something bland and vaguely corporate-sounding, based out of Delaware for maximum opacity. He would act as the broker representing this anonymous entity. The offering price needed careful calculation. We needed to offer enough to cover the LLC's outstanding debt, plus a small premium to make it attractive enough for Sterling Homes executives to sign off quickly without too much scrutiny, seeing it as shedding a cumbersome asset and its associated liabilities. Maria provided the likely debt figures, Ben advised on the legal structure for the acquisition LLC, and Tom prepared to make the approach. We structured the offer as an all-cash deal, with minimal contingencies and a quick closing timeline, appealing to any potential need for rapid capital infusion Sterling Homes might have. Tom reached out to Sterling Homes CFO through back channels, presenting the unsolicited offer from Apex Infrastructure Holdings LLC, our newly formed, anonymous entity, to acquire 100% of the membership interests in Sterling Sun Solutions LLC. The waiting game began anew, but this time it felt different. It wasn't the helpless frustration of waiting for a court date. It was the coiled anticipation of setting a trap. Days turned into a week. I watched the nearly completed power line on my property with a new perspective. It was still an insult, but now it also looked like a long, expensive monument to their impending strategic blunder. Then, Tom called. "They bit," he said, unable to keep the excitement from his voice. The CFO's office responded. They countered slightly higher than our initial offer, mostly adding coverage for some operational costs they wanted cleared, but it's still well within the range we discussed. They seemed keen on a quick, clean transaction. Their lawyers are drafting the membership interest purchase agreement. They want to close by the end of the month. That put us squarely in late July. The Texas heat was becoming truly oppressive, consistently hitting triple digits. Air conditioners across the state were humming constantly. The timing couldn't be more perfect. We finalized the negotiations swiftly. Ben reviewed the purchase agreement meticulously, ensuring Apex Infrastructure Holdings acquired all assets, rights, and obligations of Sterling Sun Solutions LLC, including the land, the equipment, and crucially, the power purchase agreement with the HOA. The closing happened remotely, facilitated through escrow. Funds were transferred. Digital signatures were affixed. Suddenly, quietly, and completely unbeknownst to Brenda Carlisle or the residents of Sterling Creek Phase 3, I, through my anonymously controlled LLC, owned the sole source of their electricity. The power line stretching across my ranch, the line they had trespassed to build, was now delivering power generated by my newly acquired asset. The irony was thick enough to cut with a knife. Now came the final, critical phase, exercising my rights as the new owner. The days following the closing were a whirlwind of finalizing the transition. As the sole owner of Apex Infrastructure Holdings LLC, which now owns Sterling Sun Solutions LLC, I technically held all the cards. Ben Carter worked through the legal implications. The power purchase agreement, PPA, between Sterling Sun Solutions, now mine, and the Sterling Creek Phase 3 HOA was the key document. Like most contracts, it contained clauses regarding service levels, payment terms, and importantly, termination conditions. We reviewed it line by line. The HOA was obligated to purchase its power exclusively from Sterling Sun Solutions as long as the facility was operational. Sterling Sun Solutions was obligated to provide power according to specific technical standards. Critically, the contract stipulated that failure by the HOA to meet its obligations, like, hypothetically, being party to a legal activity affecting the provider's operations or assets, could constitute a breach. Furthermore, while the PPA had a long term, It likely contained provisions allowing the provider, now me, to perform necessary maintenance, upgrades, or shutdowns with appropriate notice, or perhaps, under certain interpretations of force majeure or operational necessity, with less notice. But I wasn't planning on relying on contractual loopholes alone. The HOA and developer's original sin was the illegal trespass and construction on my ranch. This power line, the conduit for the electricity I now controlled, was illegally situated. Its very existence constituted an ongoing trespass, directly impacting the operations and property related to the power generation asset I just acquired. This wasn't just about breach of contract. It was about using my newfound position to address the underlying illegality. My plan wasn't to just arbitrarily cut power. It was to formally notify the HOA that due to the illegal siting of the transmission infrastructure on my private property, infrastructure essential for fulfilling the PPA, Sterling Sun Solutions LLC was initiating an immediate operational safety review and temporary service curtailment until the infrastructure's legal status could be resolved and the trespass rectified. Essentially, your power runs through an illegal line. We can't safely or legally guarantee service until that line is either legalized, which I would never agree to, or removed. Ben drafted a new set of letters. These weren't friendly cease and desist requests. This was a formal notice from Apex Infrastructure Holdings LLC, Sterling Sun Solutions LLC, addressed directly to Brenda Carlisle as HOA president. The letter detailed the recent change in ownership of their power provider. It then clearly stated that a significant portion of the transmission infrastructure servicing their community, the power line poles and cables, was illegally located on private property owned by David Davies, me, constituting an ongoing trespass confirmed by property surveys and pending litigation, citing our existing lawsuit. The letter invoked clauses related to operational safety, legal compliance, and the provider's right to protect its assets and ensure service legality. It informed the HOA that, effective 48 hours from the date of the notice, Sterling Sun Solutions LLC would be forced to temporarily suspend power transmission through the compromised infrastructure pending resolution of the trespass issue. This suspension was necessary, the letter argued, to mitigate legal risks associated with operating infrastructure sited illegally and to conduct a full safety assessment. It politely suggested the HOA contact Sterling Homes Development Corp., the entity responsible for the initial illegal installation, to arrange for the immediate removal of the offending power line from Mr. Davies's property. We timed the delivery perfectly. The notice was hand-delivered by a courier to the Sterling Creek HOA office and emailed simultaneously late on a Thursday afternoon, heading into a forecasted weekend of record-breaking heat. Temperatures expected to soar well above 105 degrees F. I imagined Brenda Carlisle receiving the letter, perhaps initially confused by the new letterhead, Apex Infrastructure Holdings, then shocked by the change of ownership announcement, and finally, horrified by the core message: their power was being cut off in 2 days due to the very power line they had illegally routed across my ranch. The 48-hour notice was legally defensible, framed as an operational necessity due to the illegal siting discovered by the new management. It also gave them just enough time to panic, but not enough time to easily arrange an alternative power source, especially over a weekend. Connecting to the main grid, as I knew from my research, was a complex and months-long process they had specifically tried to bypass. Their temporary solution, the one they thought was clever and cost-effective, was now entirely under my control. The phone started ringing late Thursday evening. First, it was Brenda Carlisle, her voice no longer cool and condescending, but shrill with panic and disbelief. "Mr. Davies, what is the meaning of this? Apex Holdings? They say you own the power now? This is outrageous. You can't just turn off our power." I calmly explained that Apex Infrastructure Holdings was indeed the new owner of Sterling Sun Solutions LLC, their contracted power provider. And yes, due to the illegal trespass situation her HOA and developer had created by running the line across my land, Apex, Sterling Sun was forced to suspend operations through that illegally sited infrastructure for safety and legal compliance reasons. But the residents, the heat, people have health conditions. You'll be liable, she sputtered. Brenda, I said, my voice even and steady. The liability originated when your developer trespassed and built an unauthorized power line on my property, a fact you were repeatedly made aware of and chose to ignore. The current situation is a direct consequence of those actions. Perhaps you should direct your concerns to Sterling Homes and demand they immediately remove their illegal installation from my land. Once the trespass is rectified, Apex will be happy to discuss resuming service, assuming a legally cited transmission route exists. Then came calls from Sterling Homes lawyers, shifting from their usual arrogant dismissal to barely concealed desperation. They threatened lawsuits, injunctions, emergency court orders. Ben handled them, calmly pointing out that Apex was operating within its rights as the asset owner, responding to a pre-existing illegal situation created by their client. Any attempt to force Apex to transmit power through illegally placed infrastructure would fail. We were prepared for legal challenges, but the beauty of the situation was its foundation in their original wrongdoing. They couldn't easily compel us to participate in their ongoing trespass. Saturday morning arrived, bright and already punishingly hot by 9 a.m. At precisely 10:00 a.m., as stipulated in the notice, technicians hired by Apex Infrastructure Holdings, following my explicit instructions, performed the shutdown procedure at the substation. It wasn't dramatic, just the flip of a few main breakers, the quiet hum of transformers ceasing. But the effect, miles away across my pasture in Sterling Creek Phase III, would be profound. Silence. No air conditioning hum, no refrigerators running, no pool pumps circulating water, just stillness and the rapidly encroaching, suffocating Texas heat. I stood on a small ridge on my ranch, overlooking the Sterling Creek development. The large, opulent houses suddenly looked less impressive, more like expensive ovens baking in the sun. The visual was incredibly satisfying, not just out of spite, but out of a sense of profound, delayed justice. They had scarred my land to bring power to these houses. Now, the very instrument of their trespass was the reason those houses stood dark and silent, baking under the unforgiving glare of the summer sun. The tables hadn't just turned, they'd been flipped, shattered, and replaced with my own. The real fallout was about to begin. The immediate aftermath of the power cut in Sterling Creek Phase III was, by all accounts, chaotic. News travels fast in a connected community, especially bad news during a heat wave. Within an hour of the shutdown, social media groups dedicated to the HOA were reportedly exploding with frantic messages. Air conditioners had sputtered silent, ceiling fans coasted to a stop, and the oppressive weight of the Texas summer heat began to press down, inescapable. People who had paid top dollar for luxury living, for guaranteed comfort and amenities, suddenly found themselves trapped in rapidly heating homes with no relief in sight. My phone, which I'd wisely set to screen calls, lit up continuously. Voicemails piled up, ranging from confused inquiries to enraged accusations and outright threats, mostly from numbers I didn't recognize, likely Sterling Creek residents who somehow got my number. Brenda Carlisle called relentlessly, her messages shifting from panicked demands to tearful pleas, then back to fury. Sterling Homes' legal team tried a different tactic, emailing increasingly desperate settlement offers regarding the original trespass lawsuit. They'd remove the line eventually, pay some damages. Just, please, turn the power back on now. Ben Carter responded coolly to each offer. The power situation was now governed by Apex Infrastructure Holdings, Sterling Sun Solutions LLC, addressing an operational and legal issue stemming from the illegal line placement. Any discussion about restoring power was contingent upon the immediate removal of the trespassing infrastructure from my property. No removal, no power. Period. The weekend dragged on under the blistering sun. Temperatures climbed to 106 degrees Celsius on Saturday and peaked near 108 degrees Celsius on Sunday. Reports trickled out from Sterling Creek residents congregating outside, fanning themselves, kids splashing in pools that were rapidly turning lukewarm without filtration. Some families checked into hotels, those who could afford it or find available rooms. Others, perhaps less mobile or financially flexible, were stuck. There were rumors of arguments breaking out, fingers being pointed at the HOA board, and Brenda Carlisle, who had assured everyone the minor easement issue was being handled. Local news outlets started picking up the story, initially framed as a mysterious outage hitting a new luxury development. But soon, the narrative began shifting as details leaked: the dispute over the power line, the rancher's lawsuit, the bizarre acquisition of the power source. A reporter from a Houston station managed to get my number and called, asking for my side of the story. I agreed to a brief, carefully worded statement, focusing entirely on the documented trespass and my repeated, ignored attempts to resolve it peacefully. For months, I explained calmly, an unauthorized high-voltage power line has been illegally constructed and operated across my private ranch land by Sterling Homes and the Sterling Creek HOA. Despite numerous warnings and legal notices, the entity now responsible for providing power to Phase 3, Apex Infrastructure Holdings, discovered this illegal siting represents an unacceptable operational and safety risk. Service was temporarily suspended, with notice, pending the immediate removal of the trespassing infrastructure by the parties who installed it. This situation is solely the result of the developer and HOA ignoring established property rights. I didn't mention buying Apex Sterling Sun. I let them focus on the core issue, the illegal line. Sterling Homes and the HOA, meanwhile, were doing disastrous damage control. Brenda Carlisle gave a disastrously unsympathetic interview, blaming an unreasonable landowner and unforeseen contractual complications, which only seemed to further infuriate the sweating residents who saw their HOA president failing to take responsibility. Sterling Homes issued a bland corporate statement about working diligently to resolve the situation and exploring all available options. Their options, however, were severely limited. They couldn't force Apex Sterling Sun to operate the illegal line. Building an emergency connection to the main grid would take weeks, if not months, and cost a fortune, precisely what they tried to avoid initially. Trying to buy back Sterling Sun Solutions was also a non-starter. Apex Infrastructure Holdings wasn't selling, certainly not back to them, and not while their illegal line remained. They were trapped by their own arrogance and corner-cutting. By Monday morning, the situation reached a fever pitch. The county commissioner's office was flooded with calls. The developer's sales center for future phases was reportedly besieged by angry Phase 3 residents. Sterling Homes' stock price even took a minor hit as the story gained wider attention. The pressure was immense, precisely where it needed to be, squarely on the developer and the HOA. Late Monday afternoon, Ben received a call from Sterling Homes' lead counsel. The tone was radically different. No more bluster, no more threats, just utter capitulation. "Okay, Mr. Carter." The lawyer sighed, exhaustion evident in his voice. "Your client wins. What does Mr. Davies want?" Ben laid out our terms, unchanged from the start, but now delivered from a position of absolute strength. 1. Immediate removal of every single pole, cable, and piece of equipment related to the power line from my property, beginning within 24 hours. 2. Full restoration of the damaged pasture land to its original condition, supervised by an independent environmental consultant approved by me at Sterling Homes' sole expense. 3. Dismissal of any counterclaims they had filed in the lawsuit. 4. Payment of significant monetary damages for the trespass, loss of use of my land, diminution of value, and my legal fees to date. The amount Ben proposed was substantial, reflecting the egregious nature of their actions and the leverage we now held. 5. A formal written apology from both Sterling Homes Development Corp. and the Sterling Creek Phase 3 HOA Board, acknowledging the illegal trespass and violation of my property rights. 6. Only after all equipment was removed from my property and the restoration work scheduled with binding contracts Would Apex Infrastructure Holdings consider discussing the terms under which power might be restored to Phase 3, likely involving a new, much less favorable PPA rate, reflecting the true cost and risk, and absolutely requiring legally sound infrastructure that did not involve my land in any way? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, the lawyer simply said, "Send over the settlement agreement draft. We'll get it signed." The news spread quickly. Within hours, a different set of contractors, one specialized in deconstruction, arrived at the edge of my property, waiting for dawn to begin the painstaking process of dismantling the power line they had so arrogantly erected just weeks before. Watching those poles come down, piece by piece, under the same scorching sun that had baked the residents of Sterling Creek, was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. It wasn't just about winning, it was about reaffirming a fundamental principle. You don't mess with a Texan's land. They learned that lesson in the most uncomfortable way possible, sweating it out, while the rancher they tried to bully literally held the power switch. The removal process was swift, driven by Sterling Homes' desperation to appease their now mutinous residents. Crews worked extended hours under the relentless sun, carefully extracting the poles, rolling up the heavy cables, and loading everything onto flatbed trucks. I monitored their progress closely, ensuring they stuck to the removal corridor and didn't cause further unnecessary damage. Within 3 days, the physical evidence of their trespass was gone from my pasture. The ugly scar on the land remained, a stark reminder, but the towering metal intrusions were no more. True to their word, delivered under duress, Sterling Homes signed the settlement agreement Ben had drafted. The funds for damages and legal fees were wired to Ben's trust account almost immediately. They contracted with the environmental consultant I'd approved, and a detailed restoration plan for the pasture was finalized, scheduled to begin as soon as the hottest part of the summer eased slightly to give the new plantings a chance. They even delivered the written apologies, though the stiff corporate language barely masked the humiliation they clearly felt. Only then, with the terms of the original trespass lawsuit settled entirely in my favor and the offending infrastructure gone, did I entertain discussions about the power situation, strictly in my capacity as the owner of Apex Infrastructure Holdings. Ben Carter handled the negotiations. Sterling Homes, now acting as the desperate intermediary for the HOA, had few options. They explored emergency generators, but the cost and logistics for powering an entire luxury subdivision were prohibitive long-term. Their only viable path back to reliable power in the short term was through the substation and solar farm I now owned. The new power purchase agreement we offered was significantly different from the sweetheart deal they'd likely given themselves originally. The price per kilowatt-hour was substantially higher, reflecting market rates plus a premium for the operational complexities and the risk Sterling Homes and the HOA had introduced. The contract terms were stricter, with hefty penalties for any future issues caused by the HOA or developer, and minchit clauses affirming Apex's right to suspend service immediately if any part of the delivery infrastructure it relied upon was found to be illegally sited or compromised by the HOA's actions again. There was also a substantial reconnection fee to cover the costs and inconvenience of the suspension they had forced. They balked initially, complaining about the cost. Ben's response was simple. These are the terms. Apex is under no obligation to provide power, especially given the recent history. If the HOA finds the terms unacceptable, they are free to pursue other options, however long those might take. Faced with the prospect of weeks or months more without reliable power as summer wore on, they capitulated again. The new PPA was signed. Funds for the reconnection fee were paid. And only then, after all my conditions regarding the trespass settlement and the new power agreement were met, did I authorize the technicians at Sterling Sun Solutions to restore power to Sterling Creek Phase 3. The process took several days to implement safely, bringing circuits back online sequentially. Nearly a full week after the shutdown, air conditioners finally hummed back to life in the Sterling Creek estates. The ordeal was over for the residents, but the cost, both financial and reputational, for the developer and the HOA was immense. Brenda Carlisle, predictably, did not last long as HOA president. The fallout from Powergeddon, as some residents bitterly called it, led to a recall vote and her unceremonious removal from the board. The story served as a cautionary tale whispered among other HOAs and developers in the region. My ranch, once just scenery to them, was now recognized territory, its boundaries clearly and forcefully re-established. The restoration work on my pasture began in the early fall. It would take time for the grass to fully recover, for the scar to fade, but the land would heal. More importantly, the principle had been defended. Owning Sterling Sun Solutions LLC proved to be a surprisingly sound, if unconventional, investment. The higher rates locked in by the new PPA ensured it turned a tidy profit, compensating me ongoingly for the trouble they'd caused, channeled through the very asset they'd used in their attempt to wrong me. Eventually, Sterling Homes did manage to secure a connection to the main grid for the development, a process that took nearly 8 months and cost them significantly more than they'd initially budgeted. Once that connection was active, the Sterling Creek HOA exercised an expensive buyout clause in our PPA to terminate the agreement with Sterling Sun Solutions. I was fine with that. Apex Infrastructure Holdings sold the substation and solar farm, land included, to a regional green energy investment firm for a healthy profit, closing that chapter completely. The entire episode, from discovering those first trespassing backhoes to watching the power poles come down, reinforced a core belief. Respect for property rights isn't just a legal concept. It's fundamental. The arrogance of Sterling Homes and Brenda Carlisle stemmed from a belief that their desires trumped my rights, that money and influence could simply pave over established boundaries. They learned, sweating in the Texas heat, that some lines you just don't cross. Sometimes, fighting back doesn't mean lowering yourself to their level. It means understanding the system better than they do, finding the leverage points they overlooked, and applying pressure with precision and determination. They wanted my land for their power line. I ended up owning their power source. Justice, like revenge, is sometimes a dish best served cold, or in this case, switched off entirely until the bullies learn their lesson under the sweltering Texas sun. If you've made it this far, let me know what you think. Was the response proportional or did I go too far? I sleep soundly knowing my land is secure, and somewhere out there, a developer and an ex-HOA president know never to underestimate a rancher defending his home.